in schools, the right says, no, it's antidepressants. Now, both of them agree shootings are real and routine. Psychological operations do not require real attacks, they do not require real villains. So, this reveals that the scapegoat in a simulated news event exists only in the mediated reality and not in real life. This is why it's important to maintain the false flag narrative. It props up the existence of the radical Islamic terrorist or the super spreader or whichever enemy they've invented. So this has huge implications for those who want to demonize specific groups or political parties as controlling world events or being responsible for this or that event. If nobody died at this event, then what does it mean when you're mad at this group for doing it if they didn't actually do it? A psyop is like World Wrestling Entertainment in that it's entirely simulated violence with pre-scripted outcomes. These do not require the reality of any of the villains they portray. They don't need real bad guys, they need actors. The real purpose of the PSYOP is to control the population year-round. These aren't special operations only performed in other countries by clandestine operatives. No, these are used by the mainstream media 24/7, 365. The movie The Village portrays a situation where a generation grows up in a simulated 19th century village, not knowing they live on a wildlife preserve in the early 2000s. The elders, with their endless drills and perception management stunts, where they wear scary devil costumes, keep the villagers in fear of the monsters outside. Again, the elders wearing monster costumes for the purpose of control is no different than the mainstream media spawning monsters out of endless drills and perception management stunts. To accept the false flag theory is therefore to believe in monsters. To accept the scapegoat and the story that supports the scapegoat's existence is to be among the mediated minds controlled by the MSM drama. And they're filtered into controlled narratives and controlled counter narratives. The knee-jerk false flag explanation is the source of a major misunderstanding that has been spread, I would say intentionally for the most part, maybe ignorantly, by lead truthers for decades. A couple of key points. A false flag is always thrown out there to misdirect the public. They throw this story out there as the counter narrative. It's meant to catch the people who don't trust the news, to keep them believing that the event happened. These are purposefully spread as a core part of the psychological operation, as the false flag theories actually give the simulated news event cover. It helps the simulated news event become realer. Real people dying doesn't happen in psyops, because this would transform a perfectly legal propaganda film into a war crime, with a whole lot of undercompensated potential whistleblowers. If there are indications that an event, a terror event or a mass shooting, is staged with actors, you can no longer call it an actual murder scene unless you can provide support. I often say nobody died, nobody cried, where's the blood, where's the tears? Now you have fake blood occasionally, fake tears occasionally, but after the event, they do manage to bring in Red Cross and they get a lot of blood donations, and they do tend to have candlelight vigils for victims, which does tend to bring out tears. My point being, if you're going to promulgate that this is a false flag, you would have to show that there was an actual killing first, a real murder. And if the mainstream media can't do this, then how can some conspiracy theorist adding on conjecture onto a story that hasn't been validated? Again, crisis actors would not be there if the event was real because they would be implicated as participants in mass murders, crimes against humanity, terrorism, and treason. So there's no way it could possibly be in their best interests. Occam's razor would suggest it's more likely that crisis actors would not be complicit in the murder of innocents. Consider how many of these crisis actors we've seen are teenagers. which means their parents would be signing releases and non disclosure agreements to participate in mass murders? The most likely answer here again is that stage events, much like movies, use special effects, not the messy butchery of actual killings. It's also important to point out this: false flags are never solved, yet we're constantly exposing hoaxes and simulated news events. Nobody's ever convincingly exposed a quote false flag. The false flag theory has hoodwinked the perceivers who would otherwise see past these red herrings and look into the fake nature of media itself. False flag theory has served as a guardrail for the mainstream media for decades, redirecting free thinkers back into the mainstream media box, where they can be programmed to react to the simulated news and the pseudo news events as though they were real. These are generic and usually erroneous and unsubstantiated theories that don't even take into account the existence of staged or fake news, and so they help to reinforce the dominant paradigm. How many celebrities do you see dying after dropping enigmatic hints or clues about their impending death? Just a pattern we've observed, but these eerie coincidences, as they're generally described, are usually evidence of staged events. They put these rabbit trails there, and oftentimes they put down alternative theories that keep the person's death as an actual established fact. Again, this is all part of building mystery. This accounts for a lot of the foreshadowing that we see. Predictive programming plants false leads and false clues, and the conspiracy conjecture is the fog that hides the fakery. This is a very easy and effective way to lead critical thinkers astray. And this is all just typical filmmaking. Foreshadowing is an established literary technique, and the themes in entertainment itself, we often observe that the themes in the entertainment concurrently all kind of echo the same messaging, and they always reinforce the dominant psyops, and this is intentional. It heightens the suggestibility of the viewers. It enhances the believability of the storylines in the news. This kind of MSM reinforcing entertainment can be referred to here as concurrent programming. And psychological operations are always scripted to reinforce existing tensions. Predictive programming is a form of emotional and psychological preparation or mental drilling to set one's expectations for a pre-planned psychological operation. So, for example, if you want to convince the public that there are real-life threats on the internet that hide behind masks and send radicals to shoot people in grocery stores or subways, the first step would be to saturate the public imagination with imagery and entertainment media, which supports this premise. Then, when the staged event occurs, the public's perceptual biases, having been rendered suggestible in advance, will more likely than not accept the story as real at face value. All mainstream entertainment reinforces mainstream propaganda. Entertainment or other media which reinforce the messaging of the contemporary psyops, such as climate fiction, constitute concurrent programming. The programming is concurrent with the events and the release of movies, television series, and they all correspond to the simulated news happening in the quote real world. I want to point out that Netflix is very prominent in all of the concurrent programming, and this stands out because its co-founder is related to Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, and Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis. World Stage Media. It's part magic show, part reality television, and part news reporting. The artificial reality construct and its metascripts are laid bare for anyone to see. When you're at home watching Netflix, you're at the de facto state church. The entertainment is a side effect of the programming, of being surreptitiously indoctrinated into the church of state. And what do we do with this? We continue to see past the special effects and the movie magic, and we independently determine the parameters of this reality. Right now, it's metaverse versus meatverse as the simulation overpowers reality because the mediated minds comprise most of the population. The metaverse is consuming the meatverse. None dare call it a hoax. The prevailing wisdom was don't automatically call it a hoax. Think about the victims, think about the families. And my take on this is that no, we do not give pathologically lying media the benefit of the doubt. You don't wait to debunk the story until after its damage has been done. The reason why I am a full-blown auto-hoaxer for mainstream events is that today's unchallenged lie becomes tomorrow's history lesson. This stuff is all carved into stone, settled media, which shouldn't be a thing. New facts should always challenge established accounts. If they are contradictory, they have to be they have to rectify this. You can't just delete the answers you don't like or that don't fit your pre-scripted narrative, but that's how the MSM works. And I used to be a little sensitive to the tears of alleged victims on the mainstream media up until the Jussie Smollett thing. This was the staged lynching or an auto lynching. This would have been blamed on the political right had it succeeded, and it would have tainted the public's perception of the MAGAs, as the MAGA hat's the new clanhood. It was perceived as a racist hate crime. But this is when I realized that the vast and living mainstream media echo chamber has always been jumping to conclusions. The media has been jumping to conclusions this entire time because the Jussie Smollett hoax was reported as real for 24 hours. So their conclusion is always that their reporting is fact-based, not fake-based. So for 24 hours, the world stage media struggled with this horrifying story of this attempted lynching of Smollett. They didn't even question it. And I was not able to use my YouTube channel to call it a hoax preemptively because it would have violated their terms of service. Well, 24 hours later, they had to admit it was a hoax. So the mainstream media apparently wants a monopoly on calling out the hoaxes. And in my opinion, they manufactured the drama with Jussie Smollett so it could make it seem like hoaxes are the exception and not the norm. And if something is fake, yeah, they'll debunk it, which is clearly not the case. Now, how can you trust anyone in media that was duped by Jussie Smollett's stunt? Everybody was. Recently, I've been calling attention to the debacle with the James Webb Space Telescope, a $10 billion telescope a million miles away. The public was presented with an image supposedly from this telescope, and it was a slice of chorizo sausage. It fooled the smartest rocket scientists. It fooled the astrophysicists, the cosmologists. They were all tricked by this. So my question would be, how can you trust them as sources? How can you trust anyone in the media that's been fooled by any of the psyops thus far, or those that swear by the psyops as real? Again,